Developed by Traveller's Tales and published back in 2004, Crash Bandicoot Twinsanity was a major turning point for the series upon its release. It expanded upon the Crash formula, added in a lot of meta humor, and presented a unique soundtrack that the series had never seen before, amongst other things. Despite these innovations, however, Crash Bandicoot Twinsanity suffered a lot of major hiccups during development, whether it be glitches, bugs, or a lot of unreleased content. Despite all of that, though, Crash Bandicoot Twinsanity is seen as a good, solid game in the series, but is definitely divided in many different areas. In terms of what I think about it, well, that's the point of this review, isn't it? One thing I can say, though, the marketing alone for this game is genius. I mean, take a look. Crash and Cortex have never been closer, honestly. I mean, given the fact Cortex created Crash, I mean, they've gotten really, really close. Cortex, I just want to say, you can crash my Bandicoot anytime, if this is what you're up to, all the time. Outside of the evil plans and everything. You know how it is. Due to the rushed development of Twinsanity, there are a lot of aspects of this game that make it more difficult to review, especially in terms of issues present within the gameplay, level design, and definitely the performance, because of the fact they wanted to get this game out in time for a holiday release, which the game definitely needs more time in the oven in certain aspects. That being said, though, despite any glitches present in the game or the rushed development, this game visually does look pretty good. It has that unique cartoony Crash art style that the series is known for. The models look really nice for Crash, Cortex, and various other characters you encounter. Each of the levels are uniquely designed, both in platforming and appearance, like the Wumpa Islands having beautiful looking waves and vast sandy beaches, Cortex's iceberg lab looking awesome with the icebergs gleaming off of the sun, and the design of Cortex's lab in general. There's a lot of really cool detail present here with the enemies, the environments, the levels. I don't have any major critiques when it comes to the game visually. This game looks pretty good, especially for a mid-PS2 title. So that's one thing I can give Twinsanity above all else. Now the soundtrack, which I usually cover after the visuals, this one is going to be a bit more of a divided opinion. Not because the soundtrack is bad or bland or anything like that, but because the soundtrack in this game is incredibly unique, because all of this is done through a cappella music. Some people, this might be considered a weird design choice, given the fact that the developers wanted to kind of have this goofy buddy comedy adventure between Crash and Cortex reluctantly teaming up to stop the evil twins, which we'll get into here in the story section. They wanted to make this more comedy-driven adventure in the Crash universe, kind of reflected in many different ways, including in the soundtrack. Because many different tracks in the game, there are no lyrics, there are no instrumentals, there isn't a traditional video game soundtrack here. Everything is done by mouth movement from the band that was commissioned to do the soundtrack. It is all a cappella music. So the music that you're hearing, with the exception of possibly some digitization to get it into the game, is all done by lip movement. I personally really enjoy the soundtrack. I don't really know of any other video game that's really attempted this soundtrack with it all being a cappella music. There's definitely some tracks I enjoy, very atmospheric, they definitely fit the mood, a lot of humorous situations, some very dramatic situations like a boss fight or encountering a number of enemies. This soundtrack is solid. A cappella music really isn't my go-to when it comes to video game soundtracks, but I do think it's personally good overall. But what I said before about it being divisive, not everybody is going to want to listen to this for the entire game. This isn't the type of soundtrack or music that everyone can get into, so it is definitely going to leave some people divided, but in my personal opinion, despite how unique it is, I do think it is enjoyable to listen to. It definitely fits Twinsanity's theme and tone. If you want to look for an example at this point in Crash's career before later titles like It's About Time and the remake stuff, this is arguably Crash's wackiest adventure, and the plot definitely shows it through the character relationships and the hilarious moments that Crash and Cortex get up to. This game takes place 3 years after Wrath of Cortex, where Cortex and Uka Uka, the villains from that game, have been frozen in ice. Cortex manages to break out of his iceberg prison, and of course, what else? Seek revenge on Crash. Through a number of circumstances, including attacking Crash with a Mecha Bandicoot robot, Crash and Cortex encounter a pair of evil parrots known as the Evil Twins. Parrots who are from a completely different dimension, the 10th dimension, and have the aim of taking over the world and stealing Cortex's brain, having an unknown relationship with Cortex to the point where they want to destroy him. Crash and Cortex, at least Cortex, realizing the threat that the Evil Twins present, they team up reluctantly to take them down. And they go through a series of misadventures with recruiting people like Cortex's niece, Nina, and going through various areas in order to gather power crystals in order to travel to the 10th dimension to take on the Evil Twins, all while having hijinks along the way, going to various unique locations. This plot is enjoyable. That's one thing I can definitely say about Twinsanity. The writing's on point, the hilarious moments between Crash and Cortex, with Cortex generally ending up being hurt or humiliated in some fashion, and all the while going down to stop a unique pair of villains within the Crash series. You do encounter some unique side characters in this game as well, like Cortex's niece, Nina, who ends up being, this is her first major appearance in the series. She doesn't have any dialogue, but she definitely has some enjoyable gameplay segments that we'll get into later. But yeah, I mean, the plot of the game is pretty solid all in all, is what I would normally say if I didn't have some issues with the plot. So what I just said about the game being solid and having a lot of humor definitely works in its favor. There are a lot of fun and hilarious moments I'll show you guys here in a second to kind of give you an idea of the tone of the story. But this story is not perfect by any means. Crash Bandicoot isn't really known for its in-depth plots, with the exception of maybe a few games, but this story has a lot of issues. The villains, for example, the Evil Twins, are completely bland and boring. There's nothing really to them. They show up only a few times throughout the game, throw out some annoying "you can't stop us" lines. They don't really have a lot of personality, their humor falls flat, and they end up being killed off at the end anyway by a random evil version of Crash in their own dimension. So, the Evil Twins are nothing villains, they don't pose a real threat, they barely show up, they're not very interesting antagonists. The side characters that you encounter in the story too also aren't very interesting, either barely appearing, not having any dialogue like in the case of Nina, and Coco, for instance, Crash's sister, making 2 small cameo appearances in the game, and that's it. She plays no other story role otherwise. They, at one point in the beginning of the game, tease a number of Crash's villains coming back to assist Cortex in destroying Crash, but they're just that, cameos. They barely show up in the game afterwards. And the very few characters that show up, like Entropy and Brio, and a number of other characters, they're just random one-off boss fights. That's really it. The plot in this game, while it is solid in a lot of ways, it does produce a story with a lot of funny moments. The funny moments in the writing are the only thing really carrying this plot. Otherwise, it's random, it's boring, it's very generic in some areas, it doesn't have good villains, doesn't have a lot of good side characters. The plot does fall flat in a lot of areas, and it is not one of Twinsanity's strong suits in the long run. That being said, however, what I said before about there being a number of funny moments, that's definitely still true. Here's a few highlights.
Throw me over there. Trust me. We're pals, right? Trust me. Take me instead! I'm an evil scientist. What do you expect? This isn't a game. Of course, only I have the key. Observe. Follow me! I know another way. Fish?
Normally when it comes to talking about a Crash Bandicoot game, there are a number of things that you can discuss, mainly centered around the core platforming surrounding Crash. Running, spinning, jumping, breaking boxes, avoiding enemies, making it to the end, finding all of the Wumpa fruit you possibly can to gain more lives, finding the crystals and the gems to go for that 100% completion rating, taking out bosses. That is the traditional Crash formula. However, Twinsanity completely ditches the level-based trope because you go to different areas in a more pseudo-open world style. Whether you're going through Wumpa Island, the minecarts, Cortex's lab, Nina's school that you go to whenever you go to Recruiter, and even the 10th dimension itself, it is more open world in this case. There are wide open areas that can use to explore in order to gain Wumpa fruit, find gems for hidden collectibles, and complete story objectives. Ultimately, this really isn't an issue in terms of the structure of the game. I do find some of these levels very intriguing, but a lot of them are open, there isn't really a ton to do, and even the platforming challenges like jumping over boxes over bottomless pits and that kind of thing, there's really no major point in doing it because the collectibles only serve a purpose of seeing some cool concept art on the menu screen. There really isn't a lot of incentive to go and do these platforming challenges to begin with. So that's one aspect of the game that when they changed up the level design, the quarter-based design I think served it better, or would have been better in this game rather than going for that pseudo-open world approach. But Crash's gameplay itself, when you play as him, it's pretty solid. Good control, Crash has some good jumping, weighty movements. He controls extremely well, like how you would expect. And the spinning animation, it's also pretty solid. I really like the weight and feel of it. You do play as Cortex in some parts of the game as well, whether you're going through Nina's private school or a number of other sections. Cortex, he really doesn't have many movements, his jump is pathetic, his ray gun is really the only source of attack that he has, and you have to pick up ammunition from different crates at certain points in the game. I mean, Cortex is fine to play through. It is a unique aspect, but there's not really much to Cortex. He wasn't one of the more fun parts of the game. And Nina, you do play through in a number of sections, mainly at her private school when you go to Recruiter, where she has these giant metal claw hands that you can use to rappel to different hooks throughout the levels. You can gain Wumpa fruit. You can use it to punch and bash enemies. Similar to Cortex, it's very situational. You don't play as her very much. But it is a unique aspect of the Crash formula, given that you could not play as either of these characters beforehand. So, gameplay style-wise and level design, while it's nothing really too spectacular at the end of the day, it is still solid for the gameplay. Part of the gameplay section where I start listing off all the complaints that I have about Crash Twinsanity's gameplay. Whether it's due to rushed development or poor design choices, I honestly suspect that it is because of the fact the game was rushed, but there are a number of issues that I do want to talk about with the gameplay. So, number one, this game is buggy as all hell. Whether it's due to the rushed development or the fact that the developers oversaw a lot of things, there are a number of glitches and bugs that are going to make the otherwise pretty solidly developed levels all the more frustrating to go through. There are times where you'll glitch through the floor, the times where you'll see unfinished death animations for Crash, you'll clip through levels and walls without it being your fault. There are certain points in the game where you go to trigger explosives in boss fights that it won't, and you'll end up dying randomly as a result of it. There are just so many glitches and issues in the game that it will mess you up during your platforming sections, and it will get extremely frustrating. And it won't be any fault of the player. These bugs are so notorious that there are videos on YouTube dedicated to pointing them out. I've even streamed Twinsanity on my other channel in the past, and there are so many glitches and bugs that killed me unintentionally or otherwise that completely messed up the flow of the level, and it's because of these bugs and glitches that make parts of Twinsanity so frustrating to play through. And again, it's not the fault of the player. That's just in the game's code because of the fact it was rushed out. This game needed more time in the oven to really flesh out all of these issues and glitches. Here are a few examples of it, and you'll kind of get an idea. Number 2, Aku Aku in this game is entirely useless. Aku Aku being a core mechanic of the early Crash games. Simple in concept, you break open 3 Aku Aku crates, Aku Aku goes on Crash's face, and he's temporarily invulnerable, being able to smash boxes instantly, take out enemies, and outside of falling into pits or going into hazards like water, you're completely invulnerable for a few seconds. Aku Aku also works as a hit point if you have 2 Aku Aku masks equipped at that point. If you take a hit, Crash won't immediately die or take any damage. Aku Aku will take the hit for you. While this is a pretty simple gameplay gimmick and something that is common in early platformers, it still works well for the Crash series, but Twinsanity completely gets rid of that out the window. While Aku Aku in this game is barely a character as is, which is, again, going back to my side character complaint from earlier for the story, Aku Aku in this game only serves as a hit point. The Aku Aku invincibility is almost non-existent. There's no point in acquiring Aku Aku masks other than a hit point because it won't even take out enemies to begin with. They completely downgraded and threw out the core idea of what makes this character unique on a gameplay level. So really, if you're getting the Aku Aku masks, be prepared to just have a hit point. Don't expect that cool invulnerability, which is a major drawback from what the earlier games were able to accomplish. To wrap up this Crash Bandicoot Twinsanity review, despite everything I've said, all of the things that I think are issues in the game, the glitches, the bugs, the half-baked ideas that are put into the game, and again, the various issues that I've had with the story, with the gameplay, lack of characters, and everything else, this is still a good Crash game, all things considered. Twinsanity sits in this weird gray area of quality in the Crash Bandicoot series, and I'm not the only person to really think this way. As someone who's been a Crash fan since I've been a kid, I enjoyed the core platforming experiences in various Crash games for their simplistic stories. Twinsanity sits in this weird area where it presents a unique idea in concept with the plot, with the gameplay of working together with Cortex, and having different gameplay styles. There are parts of Twinsanity that I do enjoy, the unique soundtrack, how the game visually looks, the writing and humor with Crash and Cortex, some of the boss fights, and the uniqueness of the level design. But that being said, though, outside of the core issues that I've talked about with Twinsanity, like the lack of fan service, boring side characters, having a generally bland plot with horrible villains, and various gameplay issues, the main thing holding Twinsanity back is that it was rushed. Issues that I've talked about concerning the glitches, whether or not you're encountering boss fights after you defeat them and you take damage, or various levels that you go through where you clip through walls, fall through the floor, and you see the unfinished work that happens, where the game kills you off randomly because of the glitches. It is disappointing to see the state that Twinsanity was released in, because despite the issues that it has, this is a generally solid Crash game. It is a good title. I do recommend you guys play, but because of the glitches, because of the bugs, and because of all the technical issues and all the cut content that could have been in this game, this does feel like a half-baked product. The product that we ended up getting was good overall, despite the issues, but Twinsanity could have been so much more, which I arguably think is the most disappointing thing about Twinsanity, despite any of my critiques. So, my overall verdict on Crash Bandicoot Twinsanity, all that said, it is a solid Crash game. It's a good title in many ways that I do think people should go and play, but keep in mind the game's shortcomings if you're a hardcore Crash Bandicoot fan, and keep in mind that this product is unfinished in many different aspects. Maybe one day that we will get a full remake of Twinsanity, maybe they'll add in all that cut content, fix all the glitches and bugs, and hopefully we'll see something more unique in this style again. But at the end of the day, Crash Bandicoot Twinsanity, good game all in all, but keep in mind that half-baked status if you attempt to play this one. And that's it for the review today, guys. Thank you for joining me for this Crash Bandicoot Twinsanity review. It was definitely a bit more polarizing one than I expected, given the fact that I've played Twinsanity a number of times and I've been a major Crash Bandicoot fan for years. This was definitely a more unique one to delve into. And when I saw that it won the poll, I had a feeling that it was kind of go in this direction upon looking back on this title. But Twinsanity is solid all in all, definitely a unique one in the Crash series. But nonetheless, everyone, thank you once again for checking out the video. If you did enjoy it, give it a like. Subscribe to the channel if you guys want to catch more gaming reviews, collaborations, unboxing videos, collection videos, and everything else that we do here on the channel. And comment your thoughts and feelings down below on Twinsanity. Have you played it? What do you think about it? Do you agree with my stance? Do you love it more? Do you despise it? Let me know all your thoughts on it down below. I'd love to see what you guys think about this unique entry in the Crash series. Otherwise, this has been it for me. Until next time, this has been Ryan from the Nostalgia Factor saying, keep on gaming.